Breaking now, a buried Kendrick Lamar track just resurfaced, and insiders say it annihilates everything the game claimed for years. This isn't a diss, this is an exposure. What was whispered is now sonic evidence, painting a picture so damaging it could erase an entire legacy. The West Coast story you thought you knew? About to collapse. For years, everybody believed the same story. The game discovered Kendrick first. The game would have signed him to his label. The game helped create Kendrick Lamar's entire career. That narrative got repeated in interviews, podcasts, documentaries, everywhere. It became hip-hop gospel. But that story is now on life support because Kendrick's own voice from the past just surfaced in an unreleased track, and it tells a very different, very uncomfortable truth. A truth that flips the entire West Coast power dynamic. A truth that makes the game's mentor claims look like revisionist history. And honestly, the silence from one side is deafening right now. Let me break down exactly what this leaked audio reveals, and trust me, this is where everything starts unraveling. Evidence number 1, the mixtape that never landed. In this unreleased Kendrick track, he describes handing his music to a game affiliate, somebody close, somebody trusted, somebody who promised they'd get it to the game himself. Kendrick was hungry back then, grinding, still building, and he believed this was his shot, so he handed over that mixtape, and then silence. Complete radio silence for years. No callback, no feedback, nothing. Then finally, years later, a message comes back, and listen to what it said. Quote, "Game didn't like it." That's it. That's all Kendrick got. But here's where it gets dark. Kendrick follows that up with another line that cuts deep. He says, quote, "He probably never even gave it to him." Let that sink in. Either Kendrick Lamar, the future king of the West Coast, was rejected, or he was sabotaged. And honestly, both scenarios look terrible for the game's narrative. Think about it. If the game actually heard that early Kendrick music and said, "Nah, I don't like it," that's one of the worst talent evaluations in hip-hop history. We're talking about the artist who would go on to win 13 Grammys, the artist who would become the first rapper to win a Pulitzer Prize, the artist who would sell out stadiums worldwide, and the game supposedly heard his music and passed? That alone destroys the "I discovered him" story. But if the affiliate never passed it along, that's even worse, because that means the people around the game were actively blocking Kendrick's rise, and the game either didn't know or didn't care enough to follow up. Either way, where's the mentorship? Where's the support? Where's the legendary "I would have signed him" energy we keep hearing about? And it gets even crazier when you look at the timeline. This was happening while the game was at his commercial peak. He had the resources, the connections, the power to change Kendrick's entire trajectory. But instead of opening doors, those doors stayed locked. Meanwhile, Kendrick had to grind independently, had to build his own buzz, had to prove himself to Top Dog Entertainment without the game's help. And now, years later, when Kendrick is the biggest name on the West Coast, suddenly the game wants to claim he was there first? That he would have signed him? Nah, the receipts are saying something very different. Fans online turned into full-blown investigators after this audio leaked. They started pulling up old interviews, old tweets, old radio freestyles, and they're finding more inconsistencies. One person on Twitter broke down the game's interview timeline and found he never mentioned Kendrick's name during the years Kendrick was grinding hardest. Not once. But the moment Kendrick blew up with Good Kid, Mad City, suddenly the game's talking about "I knew him when" and "I saw his potential." That's not mentorship, that's opportunism, and the internet is calling it out. Let's keep it real. This one piece of evidence alone shifts the entire conversation, because now we're not just talking about two artists with different memories. We're talking about audio proof, Kendrick's own words, Kendrick's own feelings from that time period. And those words paint a picture of abandonment, of being overlooked, of being erased from a narrative that should have included him. That hits different when you realize Kendrick is not the type to lie or exaggerate. His entire career has been built on authenticity, on truth. So when he says something on a track, even an unreleased one, you better believe it happened exactly how he said it did. Now let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking into place. And honestly, this is where the story turns dark. Kendrick doesn't just tell his story in that leaked track, he contrasts it, and that contrast is surgical. Throughout his entire career, Kendrick has been intentional about celebrating West Coast unity. He shouts out every rising artist. He praises every movement. He uplifts every generation. Listen to his albums, listen to his features, listen to his interviews. He gives flowers to Snoop, to Dre, to Ice Cube, to DJ Quick, to Nipsey Hussle, to Schoolboy Q, to J-Rock, to Ab Soul, to YG, to Ty Dolla $ign, to everyone, except one name, The Game. And it's not accidental, it's not an oversight, it's surgical omission. Think about how rare that is. Kendrick is known for being gracious, for being humble, for giving credit where it's due. So when he deliberately leaves someone out, that's a statement, that's a message. And the message is clear. Whatever happened between them, it left a mark, a deep one. Now let's talk about the Game side. And this is where the motive gets complicated. Because the Game has always positioned himself as a West Coast gatekeeper, a protector, a king. He spent years talking about who he helped, who he mentored, who he put on. And for a while, people believed it. But here's the thing. When you claim to be a gatekeeper, but the biggest artist from your coast says you ignored him, that's a problem. That's a credibility issue, and it makes people start asking questions, like, who else did you ignore? Who else did you overlook? Who else got blocked while you were building your own empire? And it gets worse when you realize the timing. Back when Kendrick was handing out mixtapes, the Game was transitioning. His first album, The Documentary, was a massive success, but his follow-ups, not as much. He was dealing with label issues, beef with G-Unit, internal conflicts. His career was in a weird space. And in that space, maybe he saw Kendrick as competition instead of collaboration. Maybe he saw a young, hungry, talented artist and felt threatened. Because let's be honest, Kendrick's skill level was undeniable even back then. Anyone who heard those early freestyles knew he was special. So maybe the Game heard that mixtape or heard about that mixtape and made a choice to not engage, a choice to not pass it along, a choice to let Kendrick figure it out on his own. But here's where it turns into resentment, because Kendrick did figure it out without the Game, without the cosign, without the help. And not only did he figure it out, he surpassed the Game in every measurable way. Album sales, critical acclaim, cultural impact, legacy. Kendrick became what the Game wanted to be, the undisputed king of the West Coast. And that kind of reality, that can spark some real envy, real bitterness, real revisionist history. And we've seen that revisionist history play out in real time. The Game has done multiple interviews over the years talking about Kendrick. Sometimes it's praise, sometimes it's subtle shots, sometimes it's claims of mentorship that nobody can verify. And now, with this leaked audio, those claims are being challenged because Kendrick's version of events doesn't match at all. And when you have to choose between believing the Game's interviews or believing Kendrick's unreleased music where he had no reason to lie, most people are choosing Kendrick. Fans are also pointing out a pattern, and this pattern is damning. The Game has a history of taking credit for other people's success. He's claimed he helped mentor artists who've later said, "I don't even know him like that." He's claimed he was instrumental in movements that were happening with or without him. And now, this Kendrick situation looks like the biggest example of that pattern, claiming mentorship after the success, claiming influence after the impact, claiming credit after the crown was already won. That's not leadership, that's revisionism, and the West Coast is tired of it. Let's also talk about the emotional weight of this, because Kendrick doesn't sound angry in that leaked track. He sounds disappointed. And honestly, disappointment is worse than anger. Anger fades, disappointment lingers. It shapes how you move, how you build, how you remember. And Kendrick remembered. He held on to that story. He put it in a song, and now that song is out, and it's forcing a reckoning. But here's the part that really hits different, and this is where the story becomes personal. This isn't just about industry politics. This isn't just about who discovered who. This is about a young artist who believed in the dream, who believed in West Coast unity, who believed that if you made great music and handed it to the right people, doors would open. Kendrick believed that, and he got met with silence. That kind of rejection doesn't just hurt your career, it hurts your spirit. It makes you question if your art is good enough, if you are good enough. And for an artist as introspective as Kendrick, that probably cut deep. Listen to the way he tells the story in that leaked track. There's no bravado, no bragging, just truth, raw, unfiltered truth. And you can hear the weight in his voice. You can hear the years of carrying that memory, of wondering what if. What if that mixtape had been passed along? What if the game had actually listened? What if doors had opened earlier? Would Kendrick's path have been easier? Would he have blown up sooner? Or would he have been shaped differently, maybe lost some of that hunger that made him great? We'll never know. But what we do know is that Kendrick had to build his legacy the hard way, independently, without major cosigns, without the machine behind him. And honestly, that might have been the best thing that ever happened to him, because it made him undeniable. It made him uncompromising. It made him the artist who couldn't be ignored, even when people tried. And that's the tragedy of the game side. If he really did help early on, if he really did believe in Kendrick, where's the proof? Where are the text messages, the emails, the studio sessions, the photos? Because in this era, everything is documented, but there's nothing, just claims, just stories told after the fact. And now, with this leaked audio contradicting those stories, it's looking more and more like those claims were built on air. Fans online are also pointing out a pattern, and this pattern is damning. The game has a history of taking credit for other people's success. He's claimed he helped mentor artists who've later said, "I don't even know him like that." He's claimed he was instrumental in movements that were happening with or without him. And now, this Kendrick situation looks like the biggest example of that pattern. Claiming mentorship after the success, claiming influence after the impact, claiming credit after the crown was already won. That's not leadership, that's revisionism, and the West Coast is tired of it. Because at the end of the day, this is about integrity. And Kendrick's integrity has never been questioned, ever. He's been consistent, authentic, honest. So when he tells a story, even in an unreleased track, it carries weight, it carries truth. And that truth is now reshaping how we see the entire West Coast narrative. Now let's dive into the pattern. Because this isn't just about one ignored mixtape, this is about 4 separate strikes against the game's narrative. And when you line them up, it's damning. Strike 1, tearing down Gorilla Black. In that same leaked track, Kendrick questions why a rising West Coast artist like Gorilla Black was destroyed instead of supported. For those who don't know, Gorilla Black was a talented rapper who got caught up in drama, and instead of the West Coast rallying around him, certain people tore him down. Kendrick doesn't name names directly, but the implication is clear, and fans online are connecting dots. They're asking, if the game really cared about West Coast unity, why didn't he protect rising artists? Why didn't he use his platform to uplift instead of compete? That's strike 1. Strike 2, the ignored mixtape. We already covered this, but let's sit with it again. A young Kendrick Lamar handed his music to someone in the game circle, and it went nowhere. No response, no follow-up, no respect. That's not just bad business, that's disrespect. And it's a pattern we've seen before in hip-hop. Gatekeepers who feel threatened by new talent, so they ice them out. They make them grind harder. They make them prove themselves twice. And that's exactly what happened to Kendrick. Strike 2. Strike 3, the tour with no future. Here's something most people don't talk about. The game did bring Kendrick on tour early in his career. That's a fact. But here's the question nobody's asking. What happened after that tour? Did the game introduce Kendrick to producers, to label executives, to collaborators? Did he open doors? Or did he just use Kendrick as an opening act and then move on? Because based on Kendrick's audio, it sounds like the latter. It sounds like Kendrick was brought along for the show, but not brought into the circle. And that's a subtle but important distinction. Strike 3. Strike 4, the final verdict. Didn't like it. That's what came back years later. Or maybe the game never even heard it. Either way, that's the final blow, because it shows a lack of care, a lack of interest, a lack of vision. The game supposedly has an ear for talent. He supposedly knows greatness when he hears it. But he missed Kendrick Lamar? The Kendrick Lamar? That's not just a miss, that's a failure. And it's a failure that contradicts everything the game claims about himself. Strike 4. 1 moment is coincidence. 2 moments is bad luck. But 4 moments, that's a pattern of abandonment, a pattern of neglect, a pattern of gatekeeping, and that pattern is now being exposed in real time. And here's what makes it even worse. Kendrick isn't the only one. Fans online are digging up other artists who've had similar experiences, artists who reached out to the game, who tried to collaborate, who tried to get support and got nothing, or worse, got dismissed, got overlooked, got blocked. And now those artists are watching this Kendrick situation and nodding their heads like, yep, same thing happened to me. That's not just one bad decision. That's a culture of competition over collaboration, a culture of ego over upliftment. And the West Coast is watching. Let's also talk about what Kendrick did instead, because while the game was moving in silence or moving without him, Kendrick was building his own team. He aligned with Top Dog Entertainment. He built with artists like J-Rock, Schoolboy Q, and Ab-Soul. He created Black Hippie. He built a movement, and he did it without the game's help, without his cosign, without his blessing. And that movement became one of the most respected collectives in hip-hop. That's what happens when you get ignored. You build your own empire. And now, years later, the game wants to claim he was part of that story? Nah, the receipts say otherwise. The audio says otherwise. And Kendrick's silence on the game's name, that says everything. Fans are also pointing out how strategic this leak is, because Kendrick didn't release this officially. He didn't put it on an album. He didn't make a big announcement. It just surfaced, which means either someone in his camp leaked it intentionally, or someone who had the track decided now was the time to let it out. Either way, the timing is perfect, because the game has been doing interviews recently, making subtle diss comments, throwing shade, and now this audio comes out and counters everything. It's like Kendrick is letting history do the talking. And honestly, that's the most cold-blooded move possible. Now let's zoom out, because while all this was happening, while Kendrick was being iced out, the rest of the West Coast was moving, and that contrast is important. While Kendrick was getting silence from the game's camp, other artists were getting support. J-Rock was building, Glasses Malone was rising, Nipsey Hussle was grinding on Crenshaw, Crooked I was dominating the underground, Dom Kennedy was creating the new Los Angeles sound, and all of them were getting love, all of them were getting respect. The West Coast was moving together, collaborating, uplifting, building a new era. Everyone gets flowers, everyone gets recognition, everyone gets their moment, except the man who now claims he started it all. And that's the part that doesn't add up. If the game really cared about West Coast unity the way he claims, why does Kendrick's story sound so different? Why does it sound like isolation instead of inclusion? Why does it sound like competition instead of collaboration? Let's also talk about the culture shift that was happening during this time. The West Coast was transitioning, the G-Unit era was fading, the hyphy movement was evolving, and a new sound was emerging, a more introspective, lyric-focused, conscious sound. And Kendrick was at the forefront of that shift. He represented the future, but maybe that future was threatening to artists who represented the past. Maybe the game saw that shift and didn't know where he fit. Maybe he saw Kendrick's rise and felt like his own era was ending. And maybe that fear caused him to distance himself instead of embrace it. Fans are also comparing how other veterans handled this transition. Snoop Dogg embraced the new generation. He collaborated, he mentored, he passed the torch. Dr. Dre did the same. He brought Kendrick into the studio. He executive produced albums. He made sure the legacy continued. Even Ice Cube showed love. He put younger artists in movies, on tours, in the conversation. But the game? Silence, distance, and now revisionist history. And here's where it gets wild. Some fans online are speculating that the game's recent behavior, the subtle disses, the cryptic interviews, the shade, is coming from a place of regret. Like maybe he's realizing now that he missed an opportunity, that he could have been part of Kendrick's story in a real way, but instead he chose competition, he chose ego, and now Kendrick is the king, and the game is on the outside looking in. That's gotta sting. That's gotta create some feelings, and maybe those feelings are coming out in passive-aggressive ways. But here's the thing, regret doesn't rewrite history, regret doesn't change what happened, and regret definitely doesn't give you credit for someone else's success. Kendrick built his legacy without the game, and that's just the truth. It's not personal, it's not hate, it's just facts. Let's also talk about how this impacts the game's own legacy, because up until now, he's been respected. He's had hits, he's had moments. But if this Kendrick story becomes the dominant narrative, it changes everything. It makes people question his other claims, his other stories, his other mentorships. And once that trust is broken, it's hard to get back, because in hip-hop, your word is everything. And if your word doesn't match reality, you lose credibility fast. And fans are already starting to reassess. They're going back through old interviews, old old songs, old claims, and they're asking, what else doesn't add up? What else was exaggerated? What else was revised after the fact? That's the danger of revisionist history. Once people catch you in one lie, they start questioning everything. Meanwhile, Kendrick just keeps building. He's not responding, he's not engaging, he's not even acknowledging the situation. And honestly, that silence is powerful because it says, I don't need to defend myself. My work speaks, my legacy speaks. And if you weren't there when I needed you, you don't get to claim you were there now. And this story has way bigger implications than just two artists. What we're seeing here is how narratives get built and how they get destroyed. If Kendrick's timeline is true and the audio exists, then the game's entire mentor narrative collapses. His interviews become revisionist history. His recent subtle disses look like desperation. His crown claims look like envy in disguise. And suddenly, the story of the West Coast's rise looks very different. Because it's not the story of a veteran helping a young artist. It's the story of the young artist overcoming being ignored, being dismissed, being erased, and building a legacy so undeniable that even the people who ignored him can't help but try to attach themselves to it. And that changes everything, because now we have to ask, who else got erased? What other stories were rewritten? What other legends claimed credit they didn't earn? Hip-hop has always been about authenticity, about keeping it real, about the truth. But when veterans start rewriting history to fit their ego, that authenticity gets compromised, and the culture suffers. This also raises questions about gatekeeping, because gatekeepers are supposed to open doors. They're supposed to recognize talent and give it a platform. But when gatekeepers become blockers, when they see talent as threat instead of potential, the whole system breaks down, and new artists have to work twice as hard. They have to prove themselves twice, and some never make it. We only know Kendrick's story because he made it, but how many other Kendricks got blocked and didn't make it? That's the real tragedy. The bigger conversation here is about responsibility. When you have power in this industry, when you have a platform, you have a responsibility to use it right, to uplift, to support, to pass the torch. And if you're not doing that, if you're hoarding power and blocking the next generation, then you're not a leader, you're an obstacle, and the culture will move around you, which is exactly what happened. The West Coast moved forward, with or without the game, and now Kendrick is the face of that movement, not because someone gave him that position, but because he earned it, through the music, through the grind, through the truth. And here's the ultimate irony. If the game had supported Kendrick early on, if he had opened those doors, he would actually be able to claim that mentorship. He would actually be part of that legacy. But instead, he's on the outside, watching, claiming, revising, and the internet is calling it out. So let's ask the questions nobody wants to ask, the uncomfortable questions, the questions that might rewrite West Coast history. Was Kendrick deliberately erased early on? Not just ignored, not just overlooked, but actively blocked? Did the game see Kendrick's talent and feel threatened? Did he see a future king and decide to protect his own crown instead? And if so, did he use his influence to keep doors closed, to keep opportunities limited, to make sure Kendrick had to grind harder and longer before breaking through? And here's the even darker question. Did the game block Kendrick, then rewrite history once the crown was secured, once Kendrick became undeniable, once there was no denying his greatness? Did the game then flip the script and say, I was there first, I would have signed him, to attach himself to that success? Because if that's what happened, that's not just revisionist history. That's calculated. That's manipulative. That's using someone else's legacy to repair your own. And the wildest part? Kendrick might be letting history expose the game instead of responding directly. Think about it. Kendrick has never publicly addressed the game, never dissed him, never called him out, never even mentioned his name in interviews. But this leaked audio, it says everything without saying anything. It's the most cold-blooded power move in hip-hop because it's not emotional, it's not reactive, it's just truth, documented, time-stamped, preserved, and now it's out, and the game has to deal with it without being able to say, Kendrick dissed me, because Kendrick didn't, the audio did. Fans online are calling this the silent assassination, where you don't clap back, you don't engage, you just let the facts speak, and those facts dismantle everything. That's a level of strategic thinking that most artists don't have. But Kendrick, he's always been 10 steps ahead, and this might be proof. Some people are even speculating that Kendrick has more unreleased tracks, more receipts, more audio that could surface if the game keeps pushing. And if that's true, This could just be the beginning. This could be the warning shot, the "I have more, so be careful" move. And honestly, that's terrifying for the game, because if one track did this much damage, what would 5 tracks do? What would 10? What would a whole project of receipts do? It would end the debate permanently. And here's the final piece. This isn't just about Kendrick in the game anymore. This is about who owns the West Coast story now. For years, older artists controlled that narrative. They told the story. They decided who mattered. But now, Kendrick is the king. And with that crown comes the power to rewrite, to correct, to set the record straight. And this leaked audio might be the first step in that process, the first chapter in a new version of West Coast history, one where the truth matters more than the legend. This story is not over, not even close. If one unreleased song can do this much damage, imagine what else is still buried, what else is waiting in somebody's hard drive, what else is preserved in studio archives, what else is one leak away from destroying a carefully constructed narrative. Because this is hip-hop. Everything gets recorded, everything gets saved, and eventually, everything comes out. More details are dropping every day, more fans are digging, more journalists are investigating, more artists are watching. And reports say there's already pressure on the game's camp to respond, to address this, to provide their side. But here's the thing. How do you respond to someone's own words? How do you counter audio evidence? You can't. You can only try to spin it. And the internet sees through spin real quick. So here's what I want to know, and I want you to drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you think Kendrick just ended this debate without saying a single word publicly? Do you think this leaked track was intentional? And most importantly, do you think the game can recover from this, or is his mentor narrative permanently damaged? Because this is the conversation happening right now on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Reddit, everywhere. People are picking sides. People are reassessing. People are learning a different version of history. And once that version takes root, it's hard to change it back. Make sure you like this video if you made it this far. Hit subscribe because we are covering every update that drops, every response, every new piece of evidence, every twist. And trust me, there are more twists coming. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss a single thing, because when the next leak surfaces, when the next interview happens, when the next receipt drops, you're going to wish you were here first. I appreciate you for rocking with me through this deep dive. This was a long one, but it needed to be, because this story matters. This story changes things, and you deserve the full context. Drop your thoughts below. Let me know where you stand. And remember, in hip-hop, the truth always comes out eventually. It's just a matter of time. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.